Good morning. I was just testing if you know what time it might be, whether it might be morning, in the afternoon, but I'd like to think that it is in the afternoon now. My name is Steve Okelo, as Earl has alluded to you, and I just wanted to go through very quickly some materials that I do have, and I suspect that they might be a little bit more than we could possibly cover, but I've been given assurance that it's possible to get an opportunity for you to ask additional questions. I'd like to just go through some of these issues with you. Some of them I'll go very quickly. I'd like to spend a little bit more time on this particular area about risk on licenses, but I'll go through some of these other areas a little bit much faster. Can I just get by a show of hands just to know who is here, who is from the north and who is from the south? Of England. South England Conference and North England Conference. Look, let me just see the South England Conference first. Right, okay. And doesn't look like there's any North England Conference left. Quite a few representation also from the North and South. Of course, the activities largely generate from the south of England. How many of you also, let me just find out, how many of you own your own properties? Or rather, yes, we'll talk about who owns it, but you have a Seventh-day Adventist property that you worship in on every Sabbath. I'm looking at that may look like 50%, half of you may have property. And those of you who do not have their own property and probably renting or using some other hall, some other place, almost half. Okay. I just want to just share with you who we are, Seventh-day Adventists. Everywhere I go, I try to ask this question of what is SDAA, or who are SDAA, and who we are. I was in Preston last year, I think it was, and I asked the same question. Nobody has ever heard what is SDAA. Anybody could help us. I'm going through the very basics, and those of you who know some of these things, please bear with us for the benefit of those who do not know. The legal arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Anybody else? That's a good improvement. And that's who we are. SDAA means Seventh-day Adventist Association Limited. Now, we have been around for a long time, and I did some calculation, Victor, and I found out that we are been around for 109 years in the UK. I found that a surprise for me. It's one of the founding organization we have in the Seventh-day Adventist circle in the British Union area. We have been around for that long, and I believe that we will be around for much, much longer if Jesus does not come much sooner. And so the SDAA, if you see that name, it will just simply mean the Seventh-day Adventist Association Limited. We are the legal arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the UK. In other countries, they might have other organizations very similar to this that holds their property and conduct their business, legal businesses for their properties largely. We are also a limited company. We are also in the same company, the same organization is also a charity. So we are both a charity and a limited company. We are actually based at the British Union Conference offices in Stanborough Park in Watford. Hopefully, all of you know where this might be. And therefore, if you have any issues, that's where we are based, and you can contact us there. Now, for those of you, I think it was almost half of you who are renting or hiring from other organizations, I just wanted to quickly say that you need to consider certain risks of what happens in some of those churches. The question is, who signs for the contracts between yourselves and the organization that you're renting from? I'd like to hear from some of you. So SDA signed some of it. Any other options? First elder. First elder. Sometimes some of the pastors sign for this document. I'd like to just say that if you sign a document like that with the other organizations, strictly you are doing it at your own risk, personal risk. In fact, not long ago I came up, an elder rang me and said, the council are pursuing me for business rate. We just bought a property that was not originally a church per se. It was a business or an office, and we converted it into a property that we could use for our worship. And the elder's name was on the signature, and therefore the council started pursuing them for business rates. And actually his credit rating was greatly at risk because it was a personal, it was considered a relationship between him personally and the council, and not the church, although he was doing it for the church. Another similar case where an elder signed, if you have a property refurbishment program in your church, maybe you're doing repairs or things like that, and you find that the pastor signs or a neighbor elder signs, and again there was another elder who signed a contract and was personally held accountable, especially when things went wrong. He came to me and said, "What do I do?" I said to him strictly, the issue is that you have signed that contract, you are personally responsible in the eyes of the law. And he was surprised to hear that that was the case. And so, as treasurers, I'd like to urge you to go back to your churches and look at who signs contracts between your church and other organizations that you are using. But we'd like to just say that the Seventh-day Adventist Association can help with signing contracts on behalf of the local church. So if, for example, you have a hall somewhere that you're using, you can ask us to sign on your behalf, because we ask the conferences to underwrite, and therefore you can worship without fear of being asked to personally pay. Please feel free to interact. I'd like to keep it that way. There is a hand that's right at the front here. You would need to talk to the other organization and tell them that the arrangement is not what it should be. And they may say we can withdraw it, or you can take the risk and wait until the term is over and then come to the Seventh-day Adventist Association to do that for you. So you can have a discussion with them. Okay. For those of you who do not have your church, you may be interested to just quickly go through the process of, or the journey of buying a church building for yourself. It is usually an aspiration for those who do not have their own churches to have their own. And the journey sometimes starts with the local church being tired of renting and hiring their own properties. I remember when we had our own church, there was a gentleman who used to stand up at just at 12:30. They would stand up at the back. Who was the caretaker? His name was Kevin. He would say, "You got to stop church." And you know, some of our churches start at 12:30. That's when the preaching starts. And therefore, they got fed up and tired of this idea of somebody who is a caretaker telling them when to stop. And they started saving a little bit more because they wanted to have their own church. The next thing that would happen is, if you desire that, you would need to really talk with your church board, who normally recommends this to the church business meeting, which is actually the highest authority within the local church. It's not actually the church board, it is the business meeting that has the highest authority at the local church. And therefore, the church board just simply recommends this desire to have a church to the church business meeting, and the church business meeting would make a decision whether you would go ahead and have a church of your own. And of course, it is very, very advisable that once the church business meeting has given the go-ahead, you need to consult with your treasurers. And therefore, you need to speak to your North. If you're coming from the North England Conference, you need to speak to your North England Conference treasurer and begin to have conversation about what kind of church you are doing, what kind of church you need, and they would have a bank and a knowledge of information and experience that would be very useful. They will talk to you on a range of issues of where to locate a church and where to get the money to buy one, and if there is any assistance that they could offer to you, they would be able to do that. And for those of you who are in the South, Earl is extremely resourceful and helpful to the local church for acquiring properties, and he would give you very appropriate advice. And then, of course, once the treasurers at the local conference also would take this to the executive board, and once they get to the executive board, if they see fit, would recommend that to the SDA board. Usually it comes through the secretary first, who will do a little bit of background work to make sure that what we are recommending to SDA board is of sufficient information. And the SDA board also goes further and does a lot more of due diligence work on your property before they can say you can have the church, or sometimes they might refer the decision back to the conferences for further information before you can have your own church. Question? So what you're saying is that
right now at the moment, I'll give an example of our case. We were given 2 weeks notice to leave. So 2 weeks is too short to look for a place to go and pray, because previously we've lost a few times opportunities to get church because the process is like a bit longer. So what I'm trying to say is that you shorten the process, because most of the times by the time you get the building, you start the whole process, someone else comes and just pay.
we're trying, I mean, this is the process that the conference has, and we're working within it, and there is actually very good reasons, which I cannot go into at the moment, that safeguards the church. There are some churches that have attempted to go outside this, and the losses that they have had to incur is phenomenal. And I wouldn't want to go into the details of that. But we are trying to make sure that the process is going through as quickly as possible. As far as I know, for example, in my case, we try to even call emergency meetings if a church has requested us to consider the issues. We call very short notices of SDA board to consider these issues. So we are trying to do the best, and we're trying to cut down on any other longer areas, longer processes that we can. But I can assure you we can deal with it within a week or two, if possible. But the point to remember is that there is a process, and this process sometimes can be longer if you just spring the issue with us. So keep talking with the local conference treasurers and speak to us at the SDA so that at least we know your plans and it doesn't come at the last minute and expect to get some of the directors from far apart to try and get this matter going. So the idea is to keep the information going as early as you get it. Okay, that's the quick trip on how to go through the buying of the property. Not long ago, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, I was going through another process where we are buying a significant, or trying to buy a significant property in the South England Conference, and I had to look at some of the policies that we have. And one of the policies that we use, that we have at the British Union, and actually even at the Trans-European Division policy, when we are buying a property, is that they say whenever a proposal is brought to the Seventh-day Adventist Association Board, one of the most important criteria used in approving purchase of a church building is to look at how the local church intends to use the building beyond and outside Sabbath worship services. Many of our church buildings are just only used for the Sabbath only. And after it is finished, we close and we are gone for a week. And actually, we were looking at this with my boss, Victor Pilmore, who is here on another presentation I was offering in London about 2 weeks ago, about the value properties. The properties, especially in the south of England, around London area, we hardly get a property less than 750,000. And if you think about buying a property of 750,000 pounds and just use it for 1 day on Sabbath and close it, is that a good use of money? And therefore, the policy is saying that we need to find ways, and actually we are looking more and more on how the church intends to use the property outside the Sabbath worship services. I was just in Scotland just this last weekend, where they have built up their own church for 355,000. And the members there were very excited, saying how they want to use this property for other services. They have other toddler groups and other kind of people coming through so that they can be able to use the property. So this is an emphasis that is going to be increasingly looked at. So if you are looking for a church, also have a plan of how you will be using the property outside the Sabbath day. And that's important. Yeah. Usually the insurance is on them. They have to show us their insurance to cover their own activities that they would be having in the church. I do believe, Graham, if I'm right, is that if an organization that is outside coming to use our church, we don't insure them, they come with their own insurance. Is that right? Yes, for their own general liability. They should have their own insurance to cover their own activities. In fact, before... Yeah, that would be covered up in some of that. And so they need to come there with their own insurance. And increasingly, part of the job that we do at the SDA is there's a lot of licensing inquiry. People are asking, cost, what can we do? Just last week, I got somebody called from another part of South England Conference that they said, we'd like to have alcohol anonymous group come to use our own church building. Is there any documentation on how we can be able to use to accommodate them in our church? So there's a lot of inquiries. Almost every week we get an inquiry of some some church want to use their property for other activities. And so we have to really assist, we do assist them. But this area actually is fraught with a lot of risks. And this is where I wanted to spend a little bit of more of my time this afternoon. There's a lot of risk when it comes to insurances, because there is also a lot of potential losses. So Wedley's budget could all be blown out. When he presented about budget, your budget could all be blown out if this area of work is not properly managed. So I'm going to talk to you about it very briefly this afternoon. Can I just take that hand? There was a hand here.
Yes, you mentioned about church is closed on Sunday. It's used only once a week, and then it's not used for other purposes.
Yes.
We must be careful. There's a danger that we know the church is built, and it was dedicated for the service of God. And we must be careful if we are going to use it for other purposes and rent it out for other people. Be careful of what activities take place in the church. In that building, what in effect is the sanctuary of what it is for the church.
Absolutely. We need to use it according to how it is being dedicated. As a matter of fact, this past weekend, when I was in Scotland, they gave a blessing, but they also have a plan to have the church used in other ways that could potentially use the church. They want people to come in. In fact, this gentleman who called me and said that he wanted to have their church used as anonymous, alcohol anonymous, he said to me, we are so desperate to get just human beings coming within our church building because there's absolutely no people coming in. In fact, he said to me, they were quite grateful to have their church to be used as a polling station. Last week. At least those are some of the people that are able to come in some of those churches. So there is an issue, and we can talk about some of those issues in greater details at a later stage. Can I have... Okay, could you pass the mic so that everybody can be able to benefit from some of this question? There was a hand of the lady there at the back. One moment.
Probably related to what the gentleman just asked. It seems like we are okay to rent from other denominations' building, but for us to let out to Sunday and Friday worshipers, it seems to be a problem. Can we do that? Because we are renting from other denominations' building, but for us, when we have the buildings, to let them out to other churches, it seems to be a problem. So are you saying we can do that?
Okay, that's a good question, and actually that is more of a theological question than a legal question. Because for us, we are just dealing with people who want to rent their church. So I'll leave that to the theologian. There is a theologian at the back there who may be able to make a brief comment.
I don't think it's a theological question. I think that we need to look at ourselves because we're very mean-spirited, and the sister is quite correct. We rent a preponderance of our churches rent from other denominations and other places, but as soon as we get our own building, then we become more spiritual, and there's something wrong with that kind of thinking.
Yeah, I was just saying we rent our church for people who worship on Sunday, so we do that. Our church has been rented on the Sunday now. It's been going for about a year or two now.
Amen. So you're using your church, you're renting your church, or you're using your church, giving other people to use your church property. Okay. But the thing that I think the policy is looking is to be innovative. How can you be able to make better use of a tool in your hand? Some of this, one of the most expensive assets you're going to have in your balance sheet is the property. Can you imagine you having a property worth up to 750,000? Some churches actually go up to $1 million, and you close $1 million worth of a property you use only one day. That's an expensive use of the property. And therefore, the policy is here is just saying, find innovative ways in which you can use the property as a tool for evangelism. And the onus is back onto you as a church.
I just had a quick point. Our church is at the moment looking to, we're exploring buying a property. And one of the things we found out that is if we do certain things like have children sort of activities and stuff like that, the government will also give us money. So it's also, it's quite a big thing that it's a big plus to be able to use your property for things like that, like government schemes, youth clubs and stuff like that.
That's right.
Because they will help pay for it.
That's right. And as a matter of fact, getting around the issue about whether the church is dedicated purely for worship and we should keep it that way, some other churches have decided when they are buying their properties, they buy the properties with the mind that they have annexes. They have other rooms outside the main sanctuary where they're using them for asking the council to come and run training programs and pay the local church. And they have even conferences or people coming within the church to use their property. So it is important that when you are buying your own properties, to have some of these kind of visions on how to better use your church property. You could even use your car park. I know of a church that has got a car park next to a train station going into central London, and people are struggling for a car park, and they close it. They close the car park, nobody uses it, and and they could use it for even if they had it for free, but to have some way in which they can contact or have some interface with the local community is a great thing. I mean, the community would know them for a place where you can park for free, isn't it? But it is important that we use our church property. But in the process of using the church property, it also comes with a lot of risks. Huge, huge risks that are not immediately familiar. And it is about this issue of occupation by third party. Occupation by third party. Those are the people that could give you a real difficult and problematic situation to deal with. So let's just look at who are the third party. Anybody could help me. A third party. When you have a license, you've asked a license for somebody to come in your church, maybe a church, another Sunday group church or another youth club or any other group or fitness club. They've come into your church property, and those kind of individuals or groups are called third party. So you would have places like fitness club would come, other church groups, nursery schools could come and use some of your extra space. As a matter of fact, in the north of England, there's a church that we just managed to buy there with a huge church, really, really massive. And at the bottom, they also have a room that was previously used as a nursery. So some people are trying to have come in and want to use that space for nursery. Other churches just have maybe just an extra room they could use for nursery, run by somebody from outside who are using property. But these are the third party, and we need to really, really be careful with them because of certain points that I want to raise up with you. So the third party are these kind of groups of people. The background of this is that various churches around the country, third parties have been allowed into occupation of our church premises. Sometimes it is really on an innocent, Christian, general, we want just people to come and use our property. We could have nursery schools coming to use our property, or people who are using fitness club just to use our properties. And they come innocently, and we need to be careful on what basis we are letting them in. So a large majority of churches, this is not actually a problem. They come in, they use the property, and nothing actually happens. They actually, sometimes when they finish, they just go. However, the local churches need to manage the arrangements to prevent third parties acquiring more legal rights than actually is intended. We have seen this too many times, and it is something that we really need to really manage. And as treasurers, you are really at the right place to really look at this risk of the third party getting legal rights than is actually intended. Sometimes it is just purely for them to come in and run a toddler group or run a small little nursery session there, and then they go. But sometimes, if it is not properly managed, they begin to acquire greater and more risks, more legal rights, and it's very difficult to get them out. I don't know if any of you have somebody using your property. There's a gentleman here said, talk to me about that. And any other people, any other church using their property? Somebody is using your property? Quite a few of you. And for those of you who do not have that, sometimes someone will approach you to use your church property for some kind of activity there. And it would be important for you to think about what we are about to talk about this afternoon to manage that risk. So, if you do not have one, just be aware that that is a potential risk for you to look at. Most churches, I don't know if those who have raised up their hands have come to SDA to have this signed, sign a license. And we, as a church, generally insist on only licenses. License is a legal document that allows another party or another group of people or another individual to just use the church for a specific purpose and a specific time, and that's it. That's what it is. That's what a license is. But if it is not properly managed, it could go out of hand. So it is critical that we manage the day-to-day activities of these groups. And the reason is that once these groups have come in, they need to be strictly managed, or rather, the local church needs to strictly manage. Now, Graham earlier on sparked the issue about who owns the church. I personally think that the local church really owns the church building, because they benefit from it. You have the key to it, you use it the way you like, and therefore all the benefits really comes back to you, although we might be the legal owners of the church, but strictly I think that the local church actually are the owners. Actually, we were just speaking to Victor Pilmore here earlier on, and he said to me a profound statement I'll never forget about this. He said that, the local church are the ones that own the church, and they own this church for their grandchildren. And you just ask the Seventh-day Adventist Association to hold the church property for your own grandchildren. Would you like to have your own grandchildren have a property that is undervalued, and when it burns down, there's nothing for them to inherit? So really, I think it does belong to the local church. So we really are holding this for the local church. But we need to manage this third party. And the reason is that they could take over our church completely. In one case, which I would not mention, there was a church that we nearly lost. Or rather, we didn't quite lose it, but they could take over the whole church. And we would not have use of it because they have acquired legal rights that was not intended. So we need to manage them critically. But we need to really think of them, manage them on an actual basis, on a day-to-day basis. When we sign a contract, a license, the courts, if there is a dispute, the courts looks at the reality on a day-to-day basis rather than looking at the wording on the license.